I am Jarvis, your storyteller. Welcome to the Science Fiction Exploration. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel.
First Contact and Confusion. Dr. Nix, 427, chief xenobiologist of the Meridian Science Academy, stared in horror through the observation window of Earth's largest international food market. Their crystalline body structure trembled slightly as they watched a human casually bite into what their sensors identified as a Trinidad scorpion pepper, one of the most potent capsaicin-containing substances on the planet. Protocol violation, whispered research assistant Zenith, 19, their normally flowing silver appendages rigid with shock. That human is ingesting a Class 3 biological irritant. The rest of the Meridian research team, disguised in their shimmer suits that made them appear human, watched in fascinated revulsion. They had come to Earth as part of the first official scientific exchange program between humanity and the Meridian Collective, but nothing in their briefings had prepared them for this. Log everything, Dr. Nix ordered, their crystalline form pulsing with scientific excitement despite their horror. This defies all known xenobiological principles. The human at the food stall, a stocky man with a thick beard who introduced himself as Marcus Rodriguez, wasn't just eating the pepper, he was clearly enjoying it. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he reached for another, offering it to the stunned aliens with a grin. Want to try one? They're ghost peppers, little milder than the Trinidad scorpion. Great with tacos. Lieutenant Helios, 892, their security officer, actually took a step backward. Their standard-issue environmental suit registered the capsaicin levels as approaching hazardous thresholds. Sir, they addressed Dr. Nix, this appears to be deliberate self-harm. Should we intervene? Before Dr. Nix could respond, another human approached the stall. Professor June Washington, their official liaison with the Earth Science Council, smiled as she recognized the Meridians despite their disguises. Ah, I see you've discovered our spice market. Fascinating, isn't it? The way different cultures use chemical irritants to enhance food? Enhanced? Zenith 19's voice cracked. Professor Washington, our scans indicate these substances trigger pain responses, inflammation, and elevated heart rate. Yet humans consume them voluntarily? June laughed, ordering what she called a extra spicy curry from a nearby stall. Oh, that's nothing. Wait until you see what we do with fermented foods. Or better yet, let me introduce you to coffee. The Meridians watched in collective dismay as she took a large bite of the curry, which their sensors indicated contained multiple compounds that would be classified as defensive toxins on their homeworld. Rather than showing signs of distress, she appeared to be experiencing pleasure. Dr. Nix's scientific curiosity overcame their initial shock. Professor Washington, would you and Mr. Rodriguez be willing to participate in a controlled study? Our understanding of human biology clearly requires significant revision. June's eyes lit up. A chance to help document human dietary uniqueness? Count me in. And Marcus here is a competitive hot pepper eater, I'm sure he'd love to demonstrate his capabilities. Marcus grinned, popping another pepper into his mouth. Sure thing. Always happy to show off a bit. Though fair warning, might want to keep your medical staff on standby. Things could get interesting. The Meridian team huddled together, their crystalline forms flickering with a mix of horror and fascination as they watched the humans continue to casually consume substances that would have triggered an immediate medical evacuation on their homeworld. Dr. Nix began dictating notes into their data crystal. Day 1 of Earth observation, humans appear to have evolved beyond conventional toxicological limitations. Preliminary hypothesis, either their pain reception is fundamentally different from all known sentient species, or they have developed unprecedented metabolic adaptations. Further study is clearly required, though I question whether our standard safety protocols are equipped to handle whatever this is. Zenith 19 was still staring at Marcus, who had moved on to something called wasabi. Doctor, they whispered, I believe we may need to completely rewrite our xenobiology textbooks. Indeed, Dr. Nix agreed, watching as June explained something called hot sauce competitions to an increasingly agitated Lieutenant Helios. Though I suspect this is merely the beginning of our surprises. Humans appear to have a remarkable relationship with substances we considered universally toxic. The question is, how far does this capability extend? As if in answer, Marcus called out, "Hey, who wants to try some durian? Just got a fresh shipment in." The Meridians watched in growing amazement as several humans actually rushed forward eagerly, while their own sensors screamed warnings about sulfur compounds and biological decay. This was going to be a very interesting research project indeed. The experiment begins. The Meridian research vessel Crystalline Seeker hung in low Earth orbit, its transparent hull refracting sunlight in prismatic patterns. Inside the main laboratory, Dr. Nix, for 27 had assembled what they considered the most comprehensive toxicology testing facility ever created for xenobiological research. Their crystalline form pulsed with anticipation as they reviewed the security protocols one final time. "Are you certain these containment fields are sufficient?" Lieutenant Helios 892 asked, their security programming clearly struggling with the idea of deliberately exposing test subjects to toxic substances. "Our human volunteers assured me these substances are well within their tolerance levels," Dr. Nix replied, though their own crystalline structure vibrated with uncertainty. Marcus Rodriguez and Professor June Washington stood in the preparation chamber, alongside a new volunteer, Commander Wei Chen of the International Space Agency, who had specifically requested to participate after hearing about the study. "Remember," June briefed her fellow humans, "they're genuinely concerned for our safety. Try not to frighten them too much." Marcus grinned, unpacking what he called his spice testing kit, a collection of hot sauces that made the Meridian sensors flash warning signals from 10 meters away. "No promises. Did you see how they reacted to wasabi? Wait until they learn about fugu." Commander Chen smiled diplomatically. "Perhaps we should start with something milder. Build up to the more interesting substances." Zenith 19 activated the laboratory's recording crystals as the humans entered the main testing chamber. The young researchers' form flickered with nervous energy as they began the formal documentation. Human Toxicology Study, Day 1. Subjects have voluntarily agreed to demonstrate their species' unusual relationship with substances classified as biological toxins, irritants, and chemical deterrents. Dr. Nix stepped forward, their crystalline form shifting to project a more authoritative presence. "We'll begin with basic capsaicin tolerance testing. Professor Washington, if you would." June approached the first testing station, where various hot peppers had been arranged in ascending order of potency. The Meridian sensors immediately began registering alarming readings. Starting with a simple jalapeno, June narrated, biting into the green pepper with casual ease. "Note the immediate capsaicin response, increased heart rate, slight perspiration, minor endorphin release." The Meridians watched in fascination as their instruments tracked the chemical reactions occurring in June's body. What should have triggered an emergency response merely caused a slight flush to her cheeks. "Fascinating," Dr. Nix murmured. "Your body appears to be processing the irritant as a mild stimulant rather than a threat. Shall we increase the intensity?" Marcus stepped up eagerly. "Now we're talking. Let's jump straight to the Carolina Reaper." Lieutenant Helios actually backed away as Marcus bit into the pepper that their sensors classified as a potential chemical weapon. The human's face reddened, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his heart rate spiked, but he was smiling. "Metabolic readings are off the scale," Zenith 19 reported, their own form flickering in distress. "Sir, he appears to be experiencing significant physical stress, yet showing signs of pleasure," Commander Chen explained while Marcus recovered with a glass of milk. "Humans have developed a complex relationship with capsaicin. The pain triggers endorphin release, what we call a natural high. Some of us actively seek out that sensation. Dr. Nix's crystalline form pulsed with revelation. You've evolved to interpret certain forms of chemical attack as pleasure? Remarkable. But surely there are limits? June smiled. Oh, we're just getting started. Commander Chen, would you like to demonstrate your tolerance for wasabi? The next hour proved increasingly astounding for the Meridian researchers. Commander Chen consumed an amount of wasabi that their instruments insisted should cause severe respiratory distress. Instead, he merely teared up briefly before continuing the conversation. June introduced them to various fermented foods, kimchi, natto, and something called thousand-year eggs that made Lieutenant Helios's crystalline form briefly lose coherence from shock. These foods contain active bacterial cultures, Zenith 19 noted with horror. You deliberately consume partially decomposed organic matter? Breaking point. The Crystalline Seeker's laboratory had been running continuous tests for 3 Earth days. Dr. Nix 427's usually pristine crystalline form showed signs of stress fractures from prolonged exposure to what they now termed human dietary chaos. Initial test results defy conventional xenobiology, they dictated while observing their human subjects through reinforced observation panels. Humans demonstrate not just tolerance, but apparent immunity to substances that would shatter most crystalline life forms on molecular levels. Commander Chen was currently demonstrating something called coffee appreciation, a ritual that had Zenith 19 frantically recalibrating their sensors. The young researcher's crystalline form vibrated with increasing agitation as the readings continued to spike. Doctor, these caffeine levels are approaching neural disruption thresholds, Zenith 19 reported. Yet the subject shows increased alertness and cognitive function rather than systematic failure. June Washington smiled as she sipped her own coffee. Wait until they learn about energy drinks, she whispered to Marcus, who was documenting his latest hot sauce creation, something he'd dubbed crystalline catastrophe, in honor of their guests. Lieutenant Helios 892 had given up maintaining their usual rigid security stance. Their crystalline form slumped slightly as they watched Commander Chen consume his 5th espresso of the morning. With respect, Doctor, I believe we're approaching dangerous territory. These humans are clearly operating beyond normal biological parameters. Dar. Nix was about to respond when their attention was drawn to Marcus, who had just unleashed his new hot sauce on a willing test subject, a visiting chef named Raj Patel who specialized in extreme spicy cuisine. Capsaicin levels exceeding all previous recordings, Zenith 19 announced, their form flickering rapidly. Sir, these readings suggest potential cellular breakdown. Raj's face had turned an alarming shade of red, sweat pouring down his face as he sampled the sauce. But instead of showing distress, he was nodding appreciatively. Brilliant balance of heat and flavor, Marcus. The ghost pepper really comes through, but that Trinidad scorpion finish, magnificent. The Meridian research team watched in collective horror as Raj reached for another sample. Their sensors were registering chemical reactions that should have triggered emergency protocols, yet the human was treating it like a wine tasting. I don't understand, Lieutenant Helios admitted, their crystalline form displaying stress patterns. Our preliminary research suggested humans were a relatively fragile carbon-based species. How are they not only surviving these substances but actively seeking them out? Professor Washington stepped in, recognizing the Meridian's growing distress. Perhaps we should explain human adaptability? Our history of developing tolerances? Dr. Nix's form pulsed with scientific curiosity. Please elaborate. How did your species achieve this remarkable resistance? June launched into an explanation of human evolutionary history, describing how their ancestors had developed tolerances to various toxins through gradual exposure. She explained the concept of hormesis, how controlled stress could actually strengthen biological systems. The Meridians listened with growing amazement as she described thousands of years of humans deliberately pushing their biological limits, cultivating increasingly potent plants, fermenting more complex substances, and constantly seeking new culinary boundaries to cross. You mean to say, Zenith 19 interrupted, their form flickering with disbelief, that humans intentionally expose themselves to increasingly harmful substances? For pleasure? Not just pleasure, Commander Chen added, starting his sixth espresso. Necessity drove a lot of it. Preservation techniques, medicine, ritual practices, we learned to work with substances that could harm us, eventually turning them to our advantage. Marcus nodded, carefully adding labels to his hot sauce samples. Take capsaicin, plants evolved it as a defense mechanism. We turned it into a global culinary phenomenon. Same with caffeine, alcohol, various toxic plants we've domesticated into vegetables. The laboratory's atmosphere grew tense as the implications sank in. The Meridians had believed they were studying human biological quirks, but they were uncovering something far more significant, a species that didn't just survive toxic challenges but actively sought them out, mastered them, and turned them into cultural touchstones. Dar. Nix's form pulsed with rapid color changes as they processed this information. Your entire civilization is built on a foundation of adapting to substances that should, by all logical standards, be lethal. How do you determine safe limits? What prevents catastrophic exposure? Raj laughed, still fanning his face from the hot sauce. Trial and error, mostly. Though these days we have better testing methods. Speaking of which, who wants to learn about the Scoville scale? Before the Meridians could respond, their ship sensors detected an incoming transmission from Earth. Lieutenant Helios activated the communication crystal, and a message materialized in the air. Attention Crystalline Seeker, the message read. International Space Agency requesting emergency consultation. Incident at lunar base involving experimental hydroponic peppers. Human crew showing unusual symptoms. Previous experience with human toxin tolerance needed urgently. The Meridians turned to their human guests, whose expressions had shifted from amusement to professional focus in an instant. Well, Commander Chen said, setting down his coffee. Looks like you'll get to see human adaptability in action during a real crisis. Shall we? Dr. Nix's form stabilized into its emergency configuration. Lieutenant, prepare for immediate lunar trajectory. Professor Washington, we'll need your expertise. This may be our chance to understand human resilience under genuine pressure. As the crystalline seeker changed course, Marcus quickly packed several samples of his hot sauce. Just in case, he explained to the bewildered Meridians. You never know when you might need to fight fire with fire. The Meridians were learning that with humans, the impossible was merely the starting point for innovation. The lunar crisis. The crystalline seeker docked with lunar base Artemis amid a flurry of emergency protocols. Through the station's reinforced windows, the Earth hung like a blue jewel against the stark lunar landscape, seemingly peaceful despite the crisis unfolding within the base's hydroponic gardens. Dr. Nix's crystalline form pulsed with urgent patterns as they reviewed the situation briefing. The experimental pepper plants have apparently undergone an unexpected mutation due to lunar radiation exposure. The resulting capsaicin levels are unprecedented. Define unprecedented, Commander Chen asked, already suiting up alongside Professor Washington and Marcus. Raj had stayed aboard the crystalline seeker, working on what he called potential countermeasures in the ship's food preparation area. Zenith 19 projected the analysis results. The compounds appear to be 10 times more potent than a Carolina Reaper. 3 maintenance workers were exposed during routine harvesting. They're currently in the medical bay experiencing unusual symptoms. Lieutenant Helios's form flickered with concern. By our species standards, this level of capsaicin would be classified as a biological weapon. We should implement immediate evacuation protocols. But June was already studying the chemical readouts with professional interest. No evacuation needed. Look at these molecular structures, it's still fundamentally capsaicin, just more concentrated. We can work with this. The lunar base's medical officer, Dr. Fatima Hassan, met them at the airlock. Her eyes were watering slightly, and the meridian sensors detected trace amounts of the mutant capsaicin compound on her hazmat suit. The exposed crew members are stable, she reported, but they're experiencing something unusual. Instead of just the normal capsaicin reaction, they're reporting heightened sensory awareness, increased reflexes, and they're claiming they can taste colors. Marcus whistled low. Synesthesia from pepper exposure? Now that's new. The meridians followed the humans through the base's corridors, their crystalline forms automatically adjusting to the lower gravity. They reached the medical bay's observation window, where 3 crew members lay on monitoring beds, their faces flushed but their expressions oddly serene. Their neural patterns are chaotic, Zenith 19 reported, but there's no sign of cellular degradation. If anything, their immune systems appear to be in overdrive. Dr. Nix studied the readings with growing amazement. They're not just surviving the exposure, their bodies are actively adapting to it. Professor Washington, is this normal for your species? June smiled grimly. Normal is a relative term when it comes to human biology. We've been known to adapt to some pretty extreme conditions. But this is fascinating. A communication from Raj interrupted their discussion. You're going to want to see this, his voice came through the ship's link. I've been analyzing the mutant pepper samples against Earth varieties, and I think I know what happened. The lunar radiation didn't just increase the capsaicin concentration, it altered its structure. These peppers aren't just hot, they're triggering enhanced neural connectivity. Commander Chen's eyes widened. Are you saying these peppers are accidentally making humans more efficient? In a way, Raj confirmed. The altered capsaicin is binding to neural receptors in an entirely new pattern. It's like it's upgrading their nervous systems, temporarily, at least. The Meridians watched in stunned silence as Dr. Hassan conducted cognitive tests on the exposed crew members. Their reaction times had improved by 40%, their problem-solving abilities were enhanced, and they were demonstrating unprecedented levels of sensory perception. This is impossible, Lieutenant Helio stated, their crystalline form displaying stress patterns. A toxic compound should not be capable of improving biological function. Marcus grinned. Welcome to the weird world of human biology, where what doesn't kill us literally makes us stronger. Dr. Nix's form pulsed with rapid calculations. You mean to tell me that your species can take a substance that should be lethal, and not only survive it but potentially benefit from it? It's called hormesis, June explained. Small doses of stress or toxins can trigger beneficial adaptations in human biology. Though I have to admit, this is an extreme example. The situation took another turn when one of the exposed crew members, Engineer Olivia Martinez, sat up and requested her tablet. Within minutes, she had drawn up a detailed schematic for an improved hydroponic system. The colors are showing me better ways to configure the light spectrum, she explained, her eyes slightly unfocused but her thoughts crystal clear. We can increase yield by 300% if we adjust the wavelengths according to this pattern. Commander Chen studied the designs. These calculations are incredible. And you're seeing this because of the pepper exposure? The universe tastes like mathematics right now, Olivia replied serenely. It's quite beautiful, actually. Dr. Nix turned to their research team, their crystalline form displaying patterns never before recorded in Meridian history. We must revise every assumption we've made about human biological potential. They don't just endure toxic substances, they can potentially use them as catalysts for advancement. Should we be concerned? Lieutenant Helios asked, watching as another exposed crew member began writing complex equations that seemed to describe a new form of quantum mechanics. June shook her head. The effects appear temporary, and the subjects are stable. But I think we've just discovered something remarkable about human adaptability. The question is, what do we do with this knowledge? The answer came from an unexpected source. Raj's voice crackled through the comm system again. I think I've figured out how to stabilize the compound at a safe level. With proper refinement, this could revolutionize human cognitive enhancement. All because some peppers got a bit too much moonlight. Dr. Nix's form pulsed with what might have been laughter. You humans truly are remarkable. You take what should be a disaster and turn it into an opportunity for advancement. That's kind of our thing, Marcus replied, already taking notes for his next hot sauce creation. Now, who wants to help me design a lunar pepper farm? A new understanding. 1 month after the lunar pepper incident, the Crystalline Seekers observation deck hosted an unprecedented gathering. Dr. Nix, for 27, stood before a joint committee of Meridian scientists and human researchers, their crystalline form gleaming with formal presentation patterns as they prepared to deliver their findings. The exposed lunar base crew had fully recovered, though Engineer Martinez's improved hydroponic designs were already being implemented across multiple space stations. The enhanced cognitive effects had faded, but the implications of their experience had sparked a revolution in both human and Meridian scientific communities. Esteemed colleagues, Dr. Nix began, their form projecting data patterns into the air. Our initial mission to study human dietary peculiarities has led to a fundamental reassessment of biological adaptation potential across all known species. Behind them, Professor June Washington and Commander Chen sat alongside Raj and Marcus, who had been officially appointed as consultants to the Meridian Science Academy. Lieutenant Helios stood at attention nearby, their crystalline form now displaying unique patterns influenced by their time among humans. We began this study believing humans were, by our standards, reckless in their consumption of toxic substances, Dr. Nix continued. What we discovered instead was a species that has turned biological challenges into evolutionary advantages. Zenith 19 activated a holographic display showing the modified lunar capsaicin molecule. This compound should have been lethal. Instead, humans not only survived exposure but demonstrated temporary enhancement of neural capabilities. This is merely one example of their remarkable adaptability. The Meridian scientists' crystalline forms flickered with a mixture of disbelief and fascination as Dr. Nix presented case after case, humans processing caffeine into improved cognitive function, converting ethanol into social bonding opportunities, transforming defensive plant compounds into culinary arts. But perhaps most remarkably, Dr. Nix emphasized, humans actively seek out these challenges. They deliberately expose themselves to controlled stress, pushing their biological limits to trigger adaptive responses. Marcus stepped forward, holding up a small bottle of his latest creation, Lunar Lightning hot sauce, developed in collaboration with Raj using earth peppers grown under simulated lunar conditions. This sauce, he explained, represents everything we've learned. It's not just about heat or flavor. It's about understanding how we can use these compounds to improve ourselves, to adapt, to grow stronger. Dr. Hassan, who had joined the research team after the lunar incident, presented her medical findings. The implications for human medicine are extraordinary. We're discovering that many substances we considered purely toxic might have beneficial applications when properly understood and controlled. The Meridian scientists' forms pulsed with rapid questions, their traditional caution warring with scientific curiosity. One senior researcher's voice cut through the discussion. Are we to understand that humans actively pursue biological stress as a means of advancement? June smiled. We have a saying on Earth, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's not just a metaphor, it's literally how we've survived and thrived as a species. Commander Chen added, every environment that should have killed us, every toxin that should have ended us, became another opportunity for adaptation. We didn't just survive, we learned to use these challenges to our advantage. Dr. Nix's form shifted to its most formal configuration. Based on our findings, I propose a new classification for human biology, adaptive stress enhancement species. Their ability to convert harmful stimuli into beneficial adaptations represents an entirely new paradigm in xenobiology. Raj, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. You know what's really interesting? This whole study started because you were horrified by our eating habits. Now we're talking about revolutionizing space colonization based on how humans process spicy food. Lieutenant Helios, who had initially advocated for restricting human access to dangerous substances, now displayed amusement patterns. Perhaps this explains why human entertainment often involves deliberate exposure to stress. Your horror movies and extreme sports are just another form of adaptive training. The meeting concluded with the announcement of a joint human meridian research initiative. The crystalline seeker would be converted into a permanent orbital laboratory, dedicated to studying the intersection of human adaptability and meridian biological knowledge. As the committee dispersed, Dr. Nix pulled June aside. There's one thing we still don't understand. Their form pulsed with genuine curiosity. Given your species' remarkable ability to adapt to nearly anything, what are your actual limits? June laughed, watching as Marcus offered some of his lunar lightning sauce to a brave meridian scientist who had developed a specialized capsaicin processing crystalline matrix. That's the most human thing about us, we're not interested in finding our limits. We're interested in pushing past them. Dr. Nix's form displayed a new pattern, one that might have been respect mixed with amusement. So when we warn you something is toxic, we hear a challenge, June confirmed. Though maybe next time, we'll invite you to join us in pushing those boundaries. After all, if this study proved anything, it's that adaptation is universal, even for crystalline beings. As if to prove her point, the meridian scientist sampling the hot sauce suddenly lit up with unprecedented color patterns, their crystalline form refracting light in ways never before recorded in their species' history. Fascinating, they announced to the startled observers. I believe I'm beginning to understand why humans do this. The sensation is illuminating. The end.